this. Okay, can you all see my screen? Yes.
Happy, but it looks like you have presenter view up.
Let's try this one more time with feeling. Success? Okay, only second time was the charm that time. Okay. Welcome. Hello. My name is Kathy Potter, and I am a Librarian 1 at the Connecticut State Library Division of Library Development and part of the Children's NYA team. Welcome to a deep dive into the 5 practices of every child ready to read. 2. Today's exploration is of talking. What do we know about talking? Let's look at the science behind talking, learn about current initiatives, and brainstorm ways to incorporate or expand upon activities for more speech, words, and conversation throughout library spaces, programming, and outreach. I want to acknowledge with thanks that this presentation is funded by the State of Connecticut and the Institute of Museum and Library Services under the provisions of Library Services and Technology Act, administered by the Connecticut State Library. A few housekeeping things before I begin in just a moment. I would appreciate if you changed your name to at least your first name and last initial for attendance. Today's session will be recorded and captions will be auto-generated and located at the bottom of your screen. The recording, slides, and resources will be available to access on the YouTube playlist for the DLD Children's NYA. Suzanne Kiss is joining me today, and she's off camera, and she will drop links to this and other items into the chat as we move through today's session. I will also send out the links via email to everyone here once it is available. And Suzanne is here to help monitor the chat. So please feel free to add questions along with your insights, comments, and conversation. Just like in story time, your engagement helps me stay energized, and the more we share with each other, the more we learn from each other. We'll take about a 5-minute break halfway through, and I'll leave time at the end for us to chat. At the end of the presentation, we'll share the link to a brief survey. You'll also receive an email with that same brief survey, so please take a moment to fill it out and share your feedback. Help me help you. Okay, so is there anything I missed? Any questions before we begin? Okay. At the end of this session, attendees will be able to identify the different facets of talking, its importance in early literacy and lifelong learning, and ways for librarians to understand how we learn to speak, its importance in the early years, and ways to encourage more speech and conversation in their personal and professional life. A little background into Every Child Ready to Read 1. It was first introduced in 2004 as a parent education tool to empower caregivers in helping the children in their care to develop literacy skills. Every Child Ready to Read was developed to break the fourth wall and acknowledge that caregivers were also in the storytime room and would benefit from learning how to support literacy acquisition for the children in their care through the direct messages during programs. Librarians were encouraged to participate in training on how to incorporate activities for children and messages to adults to support a child's development of the 6 skills into their story times and how to present workshops to caregivers about the skills. The 6 skills were print awareness, letter knowledge, phonological awareness, vocabulary, narrative skills, and print motivation. For me, these were honestly a bit of a mouthful, and it was awkward for librarians and caregivers to embrace and integrate them into their practice. So after a review of the program and input from librarians, in 2011, the 6 skills were transformed into 5 practices: talking, singing, reading, writing, and playing. Every Child Ready to Read 2 recognizes that by talking with children, they learn oral language, which is one of the critical early literacy skills. Talking stimulates brain development and helps in acquiring the skills featured in Every Child Ready to Read First Edition: print awareness, letter knowledge, phonological awareness, vocabulary, narrative skills, and print motivation. If you want to learn more about the Every Child Ready to Read, Kim has a LibGuide on the Children's and YA page. Every Child Ready to Read First Edition also makes the distinction that phonics is not the same as phonemic awareness, because phonics requires that a child understand the phonemic composition of words and the phoneme-grapheme relationship. The phoneme-grapheme is the relationship between a letter and the sound it makes. Phonological awareness consists of intertwined language abilities that include phonics, the sound patterns of speech; semantics, the meaning of words; syntax, how words and phrases are arranged to form sentences; pragmatics, how context contributes to the meaning of words; and discourse, the verbal interchange of ideas or conversation. From this point on, the research I refer to for this deep dive was from 2015, or was later than 2015. Language is the socially shared rules that consist of semantics or meaning, how to make new words, grammar, and social context. The semantics or meaning of language is how we use words, phrases, and sentences to convey meaning and the interpretation of that meaning. Language has a shared set of rules on how new words are formed by adding prefixes and suffixes and how it changes the meaning of the word. The rules of grammar is the basis for how language is structured and combined. The interpretation of language depends heavily upon social context: who is speaking, what they are saying, and how they are saying it. Speech is a verbal means of communication and consists of articulation, voice, fluency, and prosody. Articulation of speech is how clearly and distinctly the sounds of speech are formed and the ability to express ideas. The voice is the process of creating sounds using the vocal folds and breathing to produce sounds such as hoarseness, breathiness, and projection. Fluency and prosody are the attributes of speech, such as rhythm and intonation, and stress is the musicality of speech. We learned during the deep dive into singing that during the exercise of hearing, sound waves travel into the brain and are sorted by frequency and processed by the auditory cortex, the primary auditory area. Features such as loudness and pitch, source, speech, and names of people or things producing the sound are all identified. Wernicke's area, located in the posterior superior temporal lobe, is the area responsible for comprehension and processing language, either written or spoken. To speak, several more areas of the brain are activated. Articulation, production, and accurately spoken speech is formed in Broca's area, located in the left hemisphere. Wernicke's area and Broca's area are connected via a curved bundle of nerves named the arcuate fasciculus. The angular gyrus helps to integrate visual information with auditory information, which helps in the association of words with different images, sensations, and ideas. This area also helps with memory retrieval and notes differences between what is expected during this process and what is unusual, thus playing a part in the social context of language. The motor cortex controls the movement of the vocal folds, lungs, and vocal tract. The vocal tract consists of the larynx, pharynx, oral and nasal cavities, which work in tandem to produce sound. As we speak, we receive both input and output of sound. This system is the vocal sensory motor loop. The vocal tract consists of the larynx, pharynx, oral, and nasal cavities, which work in tandem to produce sound. As we speak, we receive both input and output of sound. This image is from the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders and illustrates how air is used to create speech. First, air leaves the lungs under increased pressure and at a high rate of speed, traveling through the larynx and the vocal folds. The vocal folds vibrate as the air passes through them. Then movements by the tongue, lips, and nasal passage produce the sounds of speech. So let's get a little more sciencey. The investigation of how we learn to speak, write, or sign, also known as language acquisition, how we understand sentences or language comprehension, and how we form speech or language production are the three foci of the interdisciplinary study of psycholinguistics. It is the study of psychological and neurobiological factors that enable humans to acquire, use, comprehend, and generate language. Psycholinguistics also studies how changes in the brain affect the processing of typical language. The field uses a variety of methods to gather data, controlled behavioral experiments, computational modeling, and analyses of large amounts of naturally produced linguistic data, electrophysiology, and functional magnetic resonance imaging. So what do you think was the first word ever spoken? Put your thoughts in the chat. Dada, yes, the bane of every mother's existence, Dada. Anybody else? Come on, give me some guesses. What could it have been? Ah, or ouch. Those are good guesses. Hi. Ah. Oh, why? Okay. So how did we, think about it, as humans, externally express the thoughts and ideas that were in our heads as speech if we didn't have anyone to teach us? According to Joanna Dornbyer-Stewart, author of The Origins of Language, an Introduction to Evolutionary Linguistics, published in 2024, it was a form of sound symbolism. Sound symbolism is the perceptual similarity between the sound of a sign and its referent. The sound of a sign may imitate the sound of an object it refers to, an onomatopoeia, and if you watch Jeopardy, that was one of the answers yesterday, or some other sensory property of the object, such as its size, shape, or movement. So put your favorite onomatopoeia or sensory property words in the chat. Can you think of an onomatopoeia on a Friday afternoon? I'll say the bane of every librarian's existence. Shh. All right, let's keep going. Put them in. I'll watch and see. Ooh, fizz, kaboom, yes. Awesome. All right, but how do we learn to speak? Is it nature or nurture? One possibility is through Michael Tomasello's theory of internalization. By using language and learning the rules of the language in the community one belongs and constructing their linguistic knowledge. A second is through Rumelhart and McClellan's approach of connectionist, by learning the patterns and irregularities of language, which are strengthened by repeated activation. A third is through Noam Chomsky's theory of universal grammar, by which there is an innate biological component of language that is hardwired into human brains. Chomsky's theory includes the use of an innate language acquisition device, or LAD, that once children are exposed to a language, they apply the parameters according to how the language is organized. To better understand how language evolved, the way a human mind processes language needs to be understood, and this is done through externalization. Externalization is the way we outwardly express what is originally internal. One way our knowledge of language is externalized is through speech. So now we learned a little bit about how the study of human language. Let's look at how babies learn language. A fetus begins hearing by 24 to 28 weeks of gestation, and because sounds are filtered through the uterine wall, only frequencies above 600 hertz pass through. Humans can't hear frequencies or pitch as low as 20 hertz, like the rumble of thunder, and as high as 20,000, like very high-pitched bird calls or whistles. For context, humans cannot hear either the vocalizations of elephants because they are infrasound, nor a dog whistle, which is at a pitch that is ultrasonic. Although the individual sounds of speech cannot be heard, the melody and rhythm or prosody is still experienced. That's for children who are still in the womb. And this is why newborns prefer their mother's voice over the voices of other women, and they already show a preference for the language that their mother spoke during pregnancy and can recognize music that they had been exposed to prenatally. However, infants are born with the capacity to hear and can distinguish between all 800 sets of phonemes that are used to construct speech in every language in the world. By 6 months of age, as babies are exposed to the finer details of sound and speech patterns, they become attuned to their native language, quote unquote. Essentially, babies' brains start the process of neural pruning, in which they winnow away those phonemes or sounds that don't match those of the language of the people around them. If they are learning the English language, they will need to focus on only about 40 phonemes. Even with the benefits of prenatal exposure to speech, infants who are preterm, have hearing impairments, or placed with grown-ups that speak a language other than what they heard in utero remain capable of acquiring language. This phase of language development is called the sensitive period, as a child first learns the sounds of vowels at about 6 months and then at about 9 months consonants. If a child is a dual language learner, this sensitive period lasts longer than a few months. Language learning uses 2 learning mechanisms, one that uses the mental computation to recognize sound, and one that requires intense social immersion and exposure to parentese, the exaggerated inflections that serve as lessons in the intonations and cadences of language. Parentese is not the same as baby talk, which are just made-up words and do not help language. Parentese is spoken in most cultures and was noted in early Roman times. Babies learn to detect the subtle differences in spoken sounds, such as the change of a consonant or the extreme variations in phonemes, even with variations in speaking rate or context that can alter the meaning of a word. If you've ever had trouble using voice to text or voice command technology, you understand how difficult this can be to accomplish. What about parentese is so appealing to babies? When speaking in parentese, words are spoken at a higher pitch, a slower tempo, and with exaggerated intonation. The high-pitched tone of parentese seems to be an auditory hook for babies that captures and holds their attention. Babies will turn their attention to parentese instead of their grown-ups speaking with other grown-ups. In the exaggeration of sounds during parentese, phonemes can be discriminated from one another and more easily committed to memory. UConn has done some interesting research showing that babies that were regularly spoken to in parentese as infants had learned twice the number of words as babies that hadn't heard parentese as often. Babies are phenomenal at statistics. First, by determining which sounds occur most frequently, they learn which phonemes are most important. Although infants are still learning to understand words, they are highly sensitive to how often phonemes occur. The statistical term is distributional frequencies and can be represented by pie charts, bar graphs, line charts. So babies figure out that the phonemes spoken more often are most important. From 6 to 12 months of age, babies are establishing the connection in the brain to the language they hear most, but not for other languages, unless the child is exposed to multiple languages during that time frame. Babies will hear the statistical distribution of the sounds of other languages they aren't regularly exposed to, but their brains aren't altered by that experience. This is why it is easiest for children to learn languages fluently up until age 7 years, and so hard for adults to learn a second language. Another way babies use statistics is in recognizing whole words. We as adults know where one word ends and another begins. Babies develop the ability to isolate words from the stream of sounds or speech that they hear and must perform complex mental processes to separate them out. They use probability to determine which syllable follows another. Babies start doing this mental math before parents realize it is happening and is not a passive process. It requires human interaction with which provides both motivation and the necessary information for babies to learn. A baby is motivationally driven by the brain's reward system and the neurotransmitter dopamine during social interactions. Babies who are gazing into their grown-ups' eyes are receiving social cues that help transition into the next phase of language learning, which is the meaning of words. Research shows that a baby that follows a grown-up's gaze to look at an object while they're speaking about it will learn more vocabulary in their first 2 years of life than those that do not. As babies are taking in information about language and calculating statistics, they are also externally expressing themselves and moving through 7 stages of language development. As with all developmental milestones, these will happen on a child's own timeline. For the first year, infants are in the pre-linguistic stage. As toddlers, there is a lot of speech development as they move into the holophrasic stage, 2-word stage, telegraphic stage, and early multi-word stage. As a preschooler, a child enters the later multi-word stage, and then finally, the mature stage. I have us set for a break now, but if everyone is feeling okay, we could keep going. If you could let me know in the chat, that would be great. I know it's only a half an hour in, so I don't know if this is too early for a break. Keep going. Anyone else? Okay. All right. If you need to step away, I'm going to take a sip of water. We're just getting into the good stuff. Okay, let's take a closer look at each stage. Doran Beyer Stewart's Origin of Language includes this table of linguistic acquisition showing the age of development, the capacity of language, and the focus on sounds, words, and meanings, or syntax and communication. During the first 12 months, an infant is learning to communicate by making cooing sounds, babbling, and vocalizing vowels and consonants. A 1-month-old can distinguish between consonant pairs, and this skill is called categorical perception. The skill is the innate ability to perceive phonemes along the sound spectrum. At about 3 months of age, babies begin to have more control over their vocal sounds and begin to create their first speech sounds. As they begin babbling, sometime around 6 months of age, they conduct experiments with sound production. As early as 8 months of age, infants recognize the beginning and ending of words and will babble with prosody or the patterns of sentences. There is a transitional period between babbling and a first word where a child will produce proto-words. Proto-words are invented words that are used to consistently mean the same thing. It could be something as simple as to represent a request. First words often refer to objects, but sometimes refer to actions, modifiers, or social interaction. First words are also those that are used to express whole sentences and are known as holophrases. The holophrastic stage is between the ages of 12 to 18 months, and it is the time in which single words can mean many different things. Around 18 months of age, a child experiences naming insight and realizes that things can be labeled, both things that are within view and those that are not. A child between 18 to 24 months enters the 2-word phase, where they may combine 2 words to form simple phrases and the beginning of syntax or proto-syntax. Even those phrases may not be grammatically correct or even complete sentences, but they will mainly consist of nouns and verbs, as in an agent and an action combination. Doggy sit could be an observation or a command. These phrases can certainly help others to understand what a child is trying to express. In addition to creating 2-word phrases, toddlers will point or gesture to further express themselves. Sometime between 24 and 30 months, a toddler will begin communicating in short, bite-sized sentences, sounding very much like a telegraph message. During this telegraphic stage, the sentences won't yet be grammatically correct, but depending on the inflection of the words, the meaning will differ. Around 24 months of age, a toddler will begin to utter three-word sentences that exhibit the word order and intonation of adult sentences, a clear indication that they understand how words are grouped into phrases and then phrases into sentences. What are your favorite or memorable 1, 2, or 3 word phrases that your child uttered or your library littles have uttered? Can you put them in the chat? It's always fun to see what first words are. Or even just funny phrases. Maisie working. Oh, library little using the computer keyboard. I'm guessing the child's name was Maisie and she was working like her grown-ups. Calling all dogs Padu. Oh, maybe like a poodle? Padu, but that's really cute. Yestertime. Ooh. Yes, yestertime for yesterday. I love it. All right, those are really cute. If you think of any more, pop them in there. The early multi-word stage, occurring around 30 months of age, involves a broader vocabulary and may include plurals and verbs. Sentences may still be brief, but communication continues to be more effective. And the later multi-word stage is observed when a child begins practicing sentences that are a bit more developed, full, and complex. After much testing, the rules of grammar begin to move from a period of correct but limited syntax to align with adult patterns that exhibit more complex syntax. In the mature stage of language development, children speak more complex, complete sentences, exhibit richer vocabularies, and provide greater details. But sometimes things don't go the way we expect them to. There are 3 main causes of hearing loss for infants, including genetic, an event such as an infection during pregnancy, or events after birth, such as an infection of the ears, meningitis, measles, a head injury, severe jaundice, a very high doses of some medications, obstruction or damage to the ear canal or eardrum, and being consistently exposed to sound levels. With hearing loss, there is a possibility of language delay. And if the last few slides represent the expected progression of language, how do we know when there is a delay in language learning? An initial hearing test is performed shortly after birth, at 3 to 5 days old, and then again before 2 months of age. And between the ages of 4 months and 3 years of age, children receive a risk assessment, and if necessary, action will follow. From 4 years through 21 years of age, testing or risk assessments occur yearly or over a span of years. However, there are some signs that language may not be developing as expected and include not babbling by 12 months, not saying single words by 16 months, not saying 2-word phrases by 24 months, having difficulty following simple directions or answering questions, having limited vocabulary or grammar, having trouble expressing needs or wants, and having difficulty interacting with peers or adults. In the paper, The Impact of Expressive Language Development and the Left Inferior Longitudinal Facilis on Listening and Reading Comprehension, authored by Stephanie N. Del Tufo, F. Sayoko Earl, and Lori E. Cutting, and published in the Journal of Neurodevelopmental Disorders, they were able to draw correlations between delays in language development and the impact on expressive language and comprehension. The researchers found that by looking at expressive milestones in language, they found that children who took longer to reach the expected milestones had poorer comprehension, poorer listening skills, and poorer reading comprehension scores. Children who reached the multi-word stages later were at greatest risk of having poor expository and narrative comprehension, meaning they had a harder time reading and understanding nonfiction and interpreting fictional stories to create a mental representation of the events, characters, and themes. Some of the delays are caused by slower processing speeds in the brain. Processing speed is how quickly your brain takes in information, interprets it, and then responds to the information. Processing speed can be improved with practice and doing brain training activities such as puzzles, games, and yes, reading. Incredibly, aside from tests to determine hearing ability, infants born to families with risk of speech disorders can exhibit signs of delay as early as 2 months old, because at that age, an infant is able to distinguish between short and long syllables. In studies of child development, scans with a magnetoencephalography, or MEG, demonstrate how the brain responds to speech. While infants are non-invasively connected to a superconducting quantum interference device, or SQUID, the sensors measure the magnetic fields that indicate the specific neurons that are firing in a baby's brain as it listens to speech. There is also some research into the discovery of biomarkers that can provide clues to a child's difficulty in learning language. One of those biomarkers is the amount of fractional anisotropy, or FA. Measuring FA is one way to quantify the properties of white matter in the brain to determine the strength of the curved bundle of nerves named the arcuate fasciculus, which connect the two halves of the brain and facilitate language learning. In their study, children with higher levels of FA answered more comprehension questions correctly. Patricia K. Kuhl, co-director of the University of Washington Institute for Learning, is hopeful that biomarkers can also help in determining whether a child is at risk for language-related disabilities like autism spectrum disorder, dyslexia, Fragile X syndrome, and others, so that early therapies can be administered, changing the future for children. And if you're curious and want to learn more, Patricia Kuhl did a TED Talk on the linguistic genius of babies, and she actually shows the device, the MEG, and a baby with the SQUID device on their head. So it's pretty cool. So what can families do to encourage language learning at home? From birth to about 8 months, it's important to engage in give and take conversations by cooing, smiling, and giving breaks to incorporate songs during daily activities and speaking in parentese. Facing a child while talking with them is important so they can see your mouth moving and learn how words are formed. Reading to them helps to form bonds and exposes them to new vocabulary. Once a child becomes mobile, from about 19 to 17 months, responding to communication attempts and waiting for an answer is key. Continue to use simple sentences and incorporate gestures to describe what you're doing. Talk about the sounds you both hear. Tell stories or recite poems and play music. As a child responds, imitate their response. Providing nonverbal cues and asking follow-up questions all help to validate their reactions. Toddlers from 18 to 36 months are exploding with vocabulary. Having conversations with them and helping them to learn new words or reinforce them by providing names and describe objects for feelings, actions, people, and objects. Continue reading books and sing and clap along to songs. Try to use affirmative statements instead of prohibitive statements to positively reinforce the right way to do something. A common one in libraries is, please use your walking feet instead of don't run inside. As preschoolers, 3 to 5 years old, a child's vocabulary will become more complex and there will be more opportunities for extended conversations. Encouraging them to talk and listening attentively and responding helps them to verbalize what they're thinking in more complex terms. Have conversations about things that have happened already and those that will in the future. Imaginative play and reading books both allow for a child to think creatively in response to scenarios they encounter. So how do we encourage language development in the library environment? Some guidance is included in Every Child Ready to Read 2. The first suggestion is the simplest action possible. When an adult is in conversation with a child, respond to them and let them lead. The second suggestion is to repeat a child's request back to them or comment on it by rephrasing it and expanding or stretching the response with additional explanations. The third suggestion is to use new words to increase a child's vocabulary. The fourth is to take turns in conversation with a child. This includes listening, responding, asking questions, and then listening to the response. The last suggestion is to make connections to what the child already knows. Conversations are a great opportunity to recall the past and connect them to current and future activities. This helps a child to develop an understanding that language can represent things other than current events, like yestertime. In addition, the Reimagining School Readiness Toolkit from the Bay Area Discovery Museum mentions talk as one of the 6 skills to focus on to prepare children to succeed in school. Their research has found that quality interactions between adults and children help to shape a child's thinking skills and they do better in school, in the workplace, and in life. Children need to have stronger social skills. The toolkit provides some promising practices for library staff to help children and model for their grown-ups to build skills in talking. They encourage library staff to use complex words freely with children, provide avenues for collaborative play, ask children open-ended questions, and provide ample wait time, and help children to recognize emotions in themselves and others. Let's take a few minutes now to brainstorm in the chat how librarians can incorporate the promising practices into their programming, spaces, and interactions. So how would you find more ways to maybe provide collaborative play, or what kinds of questions could you ask children that are open-ended? How can you help them recognize emotions in themselves and others? Dramatic play stations, like cafe, puppet theaters, yeah. Yes, during story time, use complex words, ask open-ended questions. Yep, use the ample wait time. And help them to recognize their emotions, yeah. Asking open-ended questions and hands-on play. Yes, use books with rich language. Talk about what the words mean, yes. Does it mean that you might not get to all the books or the plans that you had made, possibly. So for complex words, you want to read nonfiction. You want to use the words in context. Maybe you can present new words formally, like put new words like up on a dry erase board, or have like a word of the day or word of the week. You can also incorporate like collaborative free play after programs so that kids have a chance to chat with each other and play. When you're asking open-ended questions, you could do that like not just during a formal part of the program, but while you're circulating either during a program or through the department. And then, of course, take time to let them respond. And you don't, if you're asking a question about how they're doing something, you might want to take time to let them like formulate their answer in their head and not fill in the blank for them or give them the words that they need, but really listen to what they have to say. Yes, using books with rich language, talking about what new words mean, asking questions during reader's advisory about what stories they might like, using a letterbox in story time. Yep. Introducing a new letter, the sound, and guess words that begin with that letter. Yep. Helping them to recognize emotions. You might read books about emotions. You can ask about, the emotions of the characters. Point out the physical manifestations. Are they smiling? Are they crying? Is their face red? All great. So there's some more resources in the Reimagining School Readiness Toolkit from the Bay Area Discovery Museum. And Kim did a workshop about the Reimagining School Readiness. Both of those are great resources. And in the toolkit, they also include a reflection, so you can look at the different areas of your programming plan to see where you have strengths or maybe where there's some gaps. So I think that's a cool tool. And the toolkit also includes tips on working with different age groups to support a child's skill building. So for babies, they suggest families try new things together and ask questions as they go. Asking questions, even if a child doesn't answer verbally, gives the opportunity for a child to actively learn. They are still processing what you've said. They're formulating their response and they're attempting to communicate. Ask questions that you have too. It's an opportunity to learn together. Encourage and equip parents and caregivers to provide their babies with alternative forms of communication. So try including communication boards, laminated cards with icons, or sign language and gestures to help alleviate the frustration of babies and their grown-ups. And they do help babies to communicate earlier. You want to foster social interactions between babies with other grown-ups. Include games and activities that involve back and forth interactions like peekaboo or passing or rolling the ball, passing things out or collecting them, and include time for free play at the end or after formal programs to give everyone time to play together. And for toddlers, ask questions even if a child cannot answer verbally. Continue to encourage them to tell you or show you how things work or where something is located. And during free time, find moments to play alongside with children. Encourage and model being silly and trying new things to show that it is okay for adults to engage with a child in this way. Let children help you with everyday tasks. Children love to help. They can help put supplies away, and oftentimes, if you ask them where something belongs, they'll know exactly where it goes. It's fun to ask them how they know this. They're so observant. And help toddlers learn that other people's thoughts and feelings differ from theirs. Using dolls, puppets, and characters in books helps to open up the conversation about thoughts and feelings. For preschoolers, praise persistence through challenge. Recognize the effort and strategies a child has employed when completing a task. If they are becoming frustrated, support them by guiding them to alternative solutions. Ask them what they've already tried. By wondering aloud what might happen is a great way to introduce a new method. Encouraging them to reflect on methods that didn't work for them allows them to think more deeply. Use complex language with children because quality over quantity is what matters. Take time to describe new words, new settings, and scenarios in books and provide explanations for new vocabulary. Use play to help children recognize emotions in themselves and others. Teach strategies explicitly through pretend play, charades, and games. Post photos with emotions and their names in the library. Ask children how they would feel in different situations. Ask children to identify what makes them feel better. Support children to understand that other people have different thoughts and feelings. Reading books and encouraging pretend play helps with the process. Talk about what characters are thinking and feeling and what the child might do if they were in the same situation. And for early elementary children, ask them to explore and explain the world around them. Explanations can be made through various modes: conversation, art, building. Try taking something apart and ask children to explain what the parts are. Use focused questions to lead them to their own conclusions. Expose children to novel experiences so it opens the door to new vocabulary and conversation. Creating or encouraging the use of various spaces in and around the library, providing kits for take-home museum passes, and offering programming that provides opportunities to try or experiencing new things. Remind parents and caregivers to take a break from their technology and that there are a lot of ways to engage with technology together through interactive apps and stories. One thing I haven't talked about is that a study by researchers Betty Hart and Todd Risley revealed that there is a 30 million word gap between children of low income and high income families. Their study had some definite flaws in their methodology, but a positive outcome of that study is that there is now a focus on the importance of talking with children and not just around them. It does make a difference in language learning when we are focused on a child to help them learn in an intentional manner instead of being under the assumption that a child will just pick it up on their own. And this also helps to answer the question I posed earlier. Is it nature or nurture? It's both. We also now acknowledge that children learn not only from the mother, but also from others who may interact with them. Other parents, siblings, grandparents, child care workers, and more. It takes a village. And if you were in the field of education or libraries in 2015 when Dana Susskind's book, 30 Million Words, Building a Child's Brain, Tune In, Talk More, Take Turns, was published, you may remember the introduction of a device that librarians could wear or that libraries could circulate that would count the number of words spoken in hopes of capturing how many words a baby heard during a day. This proved to be an inaccurate way to measure talking and was soon disregarded for the most part. However, a company named Lena, L-E-N-A, has a device that can be used in daycare settings. The device is placed on a child's clothing, and each day the data can be uploaded and analyzed. I mention this because they have some printable resources that could be useful for libraries and sharing with families and post in their spaces. They have a flyer with 14 tips for talking in English and translated into 13 languages, and an accompanying sheet for staff to incorporate the tips into their daily practice. And they've also got some other language development resources on their website, including some conversation cards. So let's talk about some other resources that I found. And this is only a small portion. I will send out the rest with the follow-up matter. So the Department of Education, they've got this cute flyer for talk, read, and sing together every day, tips for families. There's the Hello Lab in the Department of Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences at UConn. They do have some outreach that they do, so I think that would be a really cool place to connect with, to have them come and maybe talk to parents or offer some information, see what they have to share. And then Talking is Teaching has resources on training community members on how to share early learning messages with families, how to transform everyday spaces into learning-rich environments, and resources to share with families, and media messaging around early literacy. One of their flyers is this one, Let's Talk About Animals, with different things that you can, different questions that you can explore. Sometimes it's hard to think of, what are all the things that we can come up with to around a certain topic, but they're all ready to go here. And Every Child Ready to Read 2 states that English language learners must have oral proficiency in a first language to become literate in a second language, and that phonological awareness and word awareness skills in first language predict phonological awareness and word recognition in the second language. Essentially, children need to learn the word for something in one language before they can learn it in another. And the organization 0 to 3 offers 5 ways to support children that are dual or multilingual learners. 1 is to recognize attempts to communicate and respond using a variety of means. Babies and children will attempt to communicate using a variety of modes until they get their message across, including verbal and nonverbal. Learning words in multiple languages or signs helps to encourage communication and let a little one know that their message is important to you. Number 2 is incorporate keywords in the child's home language. Incorporate words, numbers, and greetings in multiple languages into programming to help develop a sense of community and belonging. Number 3, partner with families to ensure continued home language development. Ask your families, even during registration, what language or languages they speak at home. Beginning at 8 months, the process of neural pruning begins, so the quantity and quality of meaningful interactions is essential in the brain's ability to retain multiple languages. Number 4, invite family members to share their language and culture. If you don't already know how to speak the languages of your families, it's okay. We are most likely not the experts. Ask your families. They will most often will be excited to share. And number 5, celebrate dual language learning as a strength. Be intentional in your choices, from programming to collections. The children in your families in your community will benefit. So thank you so much for joining me today for this deep dive into the Every Child Ready to Read practice of talking. Please join me next time for a deep dive into reading. Today's recording will be available on the Connecticut State Library's Division of Library Development page, the Children's and YA Services Professional Development Early Literacy tab. I'll send out the link to everyone who registered, along with the list of resources I mentioned and more. And please take a minute to fill out the survey. Suzanne will pop it in the chat. There it is. I really appreciate you being here. I am going to turn off the recording. If anyone has any questions, I would invite you to ask. Let me just stop my share.